Montana Territory, 1878. The wind carried the scent of coming snow across the valley as Victoria Sullivan stood at the freshly turned earth, her black dress whipping around her ankles. 22 years old and already a widow, the preacher's words had long since faded, the few neighbors who had attended the burial already departed. She remained alone beside the grave, her blonde hair pinned severely beneath her mourning bonnet, her blue eyes dry. She had no more tears left to give. Thomas Sullivan had been 47 when he died, shot in a dispute over water rights that Victoria still did not fully understand. Their marriage had been one of convenience, arranged by her desperate father back in Illinois, who saw no other future for his plain daughter except to ship her west to a stranger. Thomas had needed a wife to maintain respectability in Helena, and Victoria had needed to escape a house full of younger, prettier sisters who reminded her daily that she would never measure up. Now, after 3 years of a cold marriage to a cold man, she was free. But freedom in Montana Territory meant something different than it did back east. It meant a half-finished house on the edge of town, debts she had not known existed, and the certainty that a woman alone would not survive the winter. Thomas's creditors would come calling soon enough, and she had nothing to give them except the clothes on her back and the worthless patch of land Thomas had died defending. Victoria turned from the grave and walked back toward town, her practical boots crunching on the frozen ground. She had learned one essential truth in her 22 years: depending on anyone led only to disappointment and pain. Her father had traded her like livestock, her husband had treated her like an unwanted burden. The frontier was no place for softness or dreams of love. Those were luxuries for women who had choices. Victoria had only survival, and she would face it the same way she had faced everything else in her life, alone, asking nothing from anyone, expecting nothing in return. The boarding house where she was staying until she decided her next move loomed ahead, its paint peeling and porch sagging. Even this temporary refuge was borrowed, paid for by the small amount of cash Thomas had kept in a tin under their bed. When that ran out in another week, she would have to make a decision. Return to Illinois in disgrace, admitting her father had been right about her worthlessness, try to find work in Helena, knowing that a young widow drew speculation and unwanted attention. Or attempt the impossible and somehow hold on to Thomas's land, facing down creditors in the coming winter alone. None of the choices seemed survivable. But then, Victoria had stopped believing in happy endings around the time she turned 16, and overheard her mother telling her father that at least one daughter would have to be practical since she would never be pretty enough to make a good match. She had built her walls high and thick since then, and they had kept her safe through everything that followed. She would not lower them now, no matter how desperate her circumstances became. That night, lying in the narrow boarding house bed, Victoria stared at the ceiling and made her decision. She would visit Thomas's land one final time, inventory what little remained, and sell it for whatever she could get. Then she would head further west, to California perhaps, where no one knew her and she could disappear into the anonymity of a growing city. She would find work as a seamstress or a cook, live in a small room somewhere, and never again allow herself to become dependent on anyone. It was not much of a future, but it was hers, and that would have to be enough. She could not have known that everything would change when the sun rose. She could not have known that her carefully constructed walls were about to face their greatest test in the form of a 25-year-old cowboy with gentle hands and eyes that saw through every defense she had ever built. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky that particular shade of blue that seemed to exist only in Montana. Victoria packed her few belongings into a borrowed wagon, ignoring the suspicious looks from Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house. The older woman had made it clear she thought widows should mourn longer and more visibly, that Victoria's dry eyes and practical manner were somehow indecent. Victoria had stopped caring what people thought long ago. The ride out to Thomas's property took an hour, following a rutted trail that wound through pine forest and past several other homesteads. The land itself was beautiful, she admitted reluctantly, a small valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by stands of timber that could be logged, with soil that might grow crops if someone knew what they were doing. Thomas had not known. He had been a speculator, not a farmer, interested only in what he could flip for profit. He had never intended to actually build a life here. The cabin came into view, its half-finished walls a testament to Thomas's lack of follow-through on every project. Beside it stood a barn in slightly better condition, and beyond that, the fencing for a corral that had never held horses. Victoria pulled the wagon to a stop and simply sat for a moment, looking at the dream that had never been. Not her dream, she had learned not to have those, but perhaps it could have been someone's dream under different circumstances. That was when she saw the smoke. It rose from behind the barn, thin and gray against the morning sky. Victoria's heart jumped into her throat. Squatters, or worse, some of the men who had been involved in the dispute that killed Thomas, come to make sure the Sullivan claim was truly abandoned. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle Thomas had insisted she learn to shoot, though she had never been good at it. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. She climbed down from the wagon, her practical black skirt catching on the wheel before she tugged it free. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she moved toward the barn, her heart hammering so hard she thought whoever was back there must surely hear it. She rounded the corner, raised the rifle to her shoulder the way Thomas had shown her, and froze. A young man knelt beside a small campfire, his back to her. He wore the typical clothes of a working cowboy: denim pants, a worn shirt, a leather vest, and a hat pushed back on his head revealing dark brown hair. Even kneeling, she could see he was tall and lean, with the kind of broad shoulders that came from hard physical labor. A horse stood nearby, a beautiful buckskin mare that turned gentle eyes toward Victoria even as the man remained focused on whatever he was cooking. "Stand up," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Stand up slowly and turn around." The man went very still. Then, with deliberate care, he raised his hands and stood. When he turned, Victoria found herself looking into the most remarkable pair of eyes she had ever seen, warm brown, framed by long lashes, set in a face that could only be described as handsome. He was young, probably only a few years older than herself, with a jawline dusted with a few days' worth of stubble, and an expression of complete calm despite the rifle pointed at his chest. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice a deep baritone with a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "I apologize for the trespass. I was traveling through and the sun set before I could make more distance. I meant no harm and I will leave immediately." Victoria kept the rifle trained on him, but her mind was racing. Something about his manner did not suggest threat. His hands remained clearly visible, his posture non-aggressive. His clothes, while dusty from travel, were clean and well-maintained. And there was something in those eyes, something honest and open that she had not seen in a man's gaze in longer than she could remember. "This is private property," she said. "Yes, ma'am, I realize that. Again, I apologize." He gestured slowly toward the campfire. "I was just making coffee. You are welcome to it before I go." "I do not want your coffee." But even as she said it, Victoria could smell it, rich and strong, and her stomach reminded her that she had skipped breakfast in her eagerness to get this task finished. She lowered the rifle slightly. "How long have you been here?" "Arrived just before sunset yesterday. I will confess I looked in the cabin, the door was open, and it appeared abandoned." "I assumed the land was unclaimed." His eyes took in her morning dress, and something like understanding crossed his face. "I see I was wrong. My condolences for your loss." There was no pity in his voice, which Victoria appreciated more than he could know. She lowered the rifle completely, though she kept it in her hands. "The land is still claimed, but not for much longer." "You are selling?" he asked it casually, but she saw genuine interest flicker in his expression. "If I can find a buyer willing to pay enough to cover the debts." She did not know why she was telling him this. She should be ordering him off the property, not having a conversation with a complete stranger beside a barn that did not belong to her anymore. The young man nodded slowly, then made a careful gesture toward the fire. "Would you allow me to pour you some coffee, miss?" "Mrs. Sullivan, Victoria Sullivan." She paused, then added, "I am widowed." "Mrs. Sullivan," he repeated her name with that same gentle courtesy. "My name is Adam Reeves. I would consider it an honor to share my coffee with you, and then I will be on my way." He smiled, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his already handsome face into something that made Victoria's breath catch unexpectedly. "Unless you would like to hear my offer for the land." Victoria stared at him. "You want to buy it?" "I have been looking for property in this area. I worked cattle in Texas for 6 years, saved every penny. I am ready to build something of my own." He gestured toward the valley around them. "This land has good bones." Water, timber, flat ground for crops or grazing. The location is sound. The cabin is unfinished, the barn needs work, there is no operational corral. Victoria did not know why she was listing the problems. If he wanted to buy, she should be emphasizing the positives. Adam's smile widened. I am good with my hands, Mrs. Sullivan. I can finish what was started. He paused, his expression growing more serious. May I ask, are you truly intent on selling, or would you prefer to stay? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she preferred. Her father had never asked. Thomas had never asked. Even the few neighbors who had spoken to her since the funeral had simply assumed she would leave, that a woman alone could not possibly manage property in Montana territory. My preferences are irrelevant, she said, the words coming out sharper than intended. I cannot run this land alone and I have debts to settle. I see. Adam studied her for a long moment, and Victoria had the unsettling sensation that he saw far more than she wanted him to. Then he gestured once more toward the fire. Coffee first, then we can discuss terms. I promise I do not bite, Mrs. Sullivan, and you are still armed. Despite herself, despite all her rules about trusting no one and depending on no one, Victoria found herself nodding. She leaned the rifle against the barn wall but kept it within reach, then accepted the tin cup Adam poured for her. The coffee was indeed good, better than anything she had made herself. They stood on opposite sides of the small fire, two strangers in the Montana morning, and began to talk. Adam Reeves, she learned, was 25 years old, originally from a small town outside Austin. He had left home at 19 after both his parents died in a fever outbreak, heading north to work cattle drives. He had spent 6 years learning everything there was to know about ranching, horses, and survival on the frontier, sending every spare dollar to a bank in Helena in preparation for the day he could buy his own land. He was tired of drifting, he said. He wanted to build something permanent, something that would last. Victoria found herself telling him about Illinois, though she kept the details vague. About her marriage to Thomas, which had been brief and businesslike. About the debts she had discovered after his death, which totaled nearly $300, a fortune she did not have. About her plan to sell and move west to disappear into anonymity. $300. Adam was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. I have $500 saved. I could pay off the debts and give you the remaining $200 to start fresh wherever you are going. Victoria's throat tightened unexpectedly. It was a generous offer, more generous than she had any right to expect. It would solve her immediate problems and give her the freedom she claimed to want. She should accept immediately, thank him, and walk away. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why would you do that? You do not know me. For all you know, I am lying about the debts." Adam looked up, and again she was struck by the directness of his gaze. I am a good judge of character, Mrs. Sullivan, and I do not think you are a liar. He paused. I also do not think you truly want to leave. I think you want to stay, but you believe it is impossible. His words hit too close to a truth Victoria had been trying to ignore. She set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. What I want does not matter. This is the frontier, Mr. Reeves, not a fairy tale. Women alone do not survive out here. That is simply reality. Some women do, he said it quietly. I have met several who run their own homesteads, their own businesses. It is not common, but it is not impossible either. Those women are stronger than I am. Are they? Adam tilted his head slightly. You are standing here, armed, confronting a stranger on your property, negotiating the sale of your land. You are 22 years old, widowed, and still standing despite everything that has tried to knock you down. That sounds strong to me. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest, a tiny fissure in the walls she had built so carefully. She turned away, ostensibly to look out at the valley, but really to hide whatever expression might be showing on her face. Strength does not pay debts, Mr. Reeves. Strength does not build barns or plant crops or survive winter. No, he agreed, but determination does, and help when it is offered honestly. She turned back to face him. I do not accept charity. I am not offering charity, I am offering a business proposition. Adam met her eyes steadily. What if instead of selling, you hired me to work the land? I would finish the cabin and barn, put in crops come spring, run cattle if we can afford to buy any. You would maintain ownership and I would work for wages plus room and board. At the end of a year, we could reassess. If the land is turning profit, we continue. If not, you sell to me at the original price we agree on today." Victoria stared at him. "That is insane. Why would you work for wages when you could own the land outright?" "Because I do not think the land is what you need to sell," Adam said quietly. "I think you need to prove to yourself that you can do this, and I think you deserve that chance." The crack in her walls widened. Victoria felt suddenly unsteady, her careful control slipping. This stranger, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere, was offering her exactly what she had not dared to want, a chance to stay, to build something, to not run away in defeat. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was also the first time anyone had asked what she needed rather than what was convenient for them. "I would need to think about it," she heard herself say. "Of course," Adam nodded. "I will be in Helena for the next few days, staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street. You can send word when you decide." He poured the remainder of his coffee on the fire, then retrieved his saddle from where it lay near his horse. "Thank you for not shooting me, Mrs. Sullivan, and for the conversation." "Mr. Reeves," Victoria stopped him as he prepared to mount. "Where were you planning to go today if you had not made this offer?" He paused, one foot in the stirrup. "I was going to look at another property west of here, smaller, rockier, but available." He smiled slightly. "I will confess, though this land suits me better, I hope you will consider my proposition." Then he was up on his horse, settling his hat more firmly on his head. He touched the brim in a small salute, and Victoria found herself raising her hand in an awkward wave before she could stop herself. She stood beside the barn and watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared into the tree line. Only then did she allow herself to sink down onto a nearby stump, her legs suddenly shaky. What had just happened? She had come here to close a chapter of her life, to accept defeat gracefully and move on to whatever lonely future awaited her. Instead, she had met a stranger who saw through her defenses as though they were made of glass, who offered her help without demanding anything in return, who looked at her with those honest brown eyes and made her feel, for the first time in years, like she might be worth something beyond her usefulness. It was dangerous. It was foolish. Victoria knew better than to trust easily, especially to trust a man. Her father had taught her that men saw women as property or burden. Thomas had reinforced that lesson daily. And now Adam Reeves, with his gentle voice and generous offer, was asking her to believe that perhaps her experience had been limited, that perhaps not all men were the same. She could not afford to believe that. Belief led to hope, and hope led to disappointment. She had survived this long by expecting nothing and depending on no one. Why would she change that now for a stranger who might disappear tomorrow, taking whatever money she gave him for supplies and leaving her in an even worse position? But even as she listed all the reasons to refuse, Victoria knew she was going to accept, because underneath all her defenses and protective cynicism, there was still a tiny spark of something that refused to die. Not hope exactly, she would not call it that. More like stubborn refusal to give up, the same quality that had gotten her through childhood, through marriage, through widowhood. The same quality that had made her pick up that rifle this morning instead of running. Maybe Adam was right, maybe she was stronger than she believed. Victoria stood, collected her coffee cup, and walked back to the wagon. She had a decision to make, and for once in her life she was going to make it based on what she wanted, not what was safe or expected. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 3 days later, Victoria stood outside the boarding house on 3rd Street in Helena, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had composed and discarded a dozen messages, but finally decided that this conversation needed to happen face to face. She had questions, terms, conditions that needed to be discussed before she could commit to such an arrangement. She was absolutely not here because she could not stop thinking about honest brown eyes and a smile that made her feel seen. Mrs. Patterson, who ran this boarding house, directed her to a small parlor where residents could receive visitors. Victoria waited there, perched on the edge of an uncomfortable settee, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had dressed carefully that morning in her best day dress, still black, still mourning, but at least not threadbare. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly under a simple bonnet. She looked, she hoped, like a businesswoman prepared to discuss terms, not like a young widow whose defenses were crumbling. Adam appeared in the doorway so suddenly that Victoria startled. He had cleaned up since she last saw him, freshly shaved, his hair combed back, wearing a clean shirt and vest. He looked even younger and more handsome than she remembered, and Victoria felt her carefully prepared speech evaporate from her mind. "Mrs. Sullivan," his face lit with genuine pleasure, "I am glad you came." "Mr. Reeves," she gestured to the chair across from her, trying to reclaim some sense of control. "I have been considering your proposition." "Of course," he sat, his posture relaxed but attentive. "I am happy to answer any questions." Victoria had a whole list prepared. She pulled it from her reticule, a piece of paper covered in her neat handwriting. "First, regarding wages, I can afford very little until the land starts producing income. Would you accept room and board plus a percentage of any profit?" "That seems fair." "Second, sleeping arrangements. The cabin is small and unfinished. It would not be proper for us to share the space unmarried." She felt her cheeks heat even saying this, but it had to be addressed. "Perhaps you could stay in the barn until the cabin could be expanded." "I have slept in worse places." Adam's tone was matter of fact, no hint of impropriety. "Or I could build a small bunkhouse. The lumber is here already. I saw it stacked behind the barn." Victoria made a note on her paper. "Third, regarding decisions about the land. Since I would retain ownership, I assume I would have final say on major choices, but I would want your input on practical matters." "I would expect nothing less. It is your land, Mrs. Sullivan." Fourth, Victoria took a breath. "I need to understand why you are willing to do this. Your original offer to buy the land outright makes financial sense. This arrangement benefits you far less. I do not understand your motivation." Adam was quiet for a moment, and Victoria forced herself to meet his eyes. She needed to see his expression when he answered this. "The truth is," he said slowly, "I have spent 6 years drifting, working for other people's dreams. Every ranch I have worked, I have watched men build something lasting, a home, a family, a legacy. And I have envied that, not the wealth, but the rootedness, the sense of belonging somewhere." He leaned forward slightly. "When I saw your land, I saw potential. But when I met you, I saw someone who needed that same thing I did, a chance to prove that we could build something real. I would rather be part of making that happen than just buy it for myself." "That is remarkably idealistic for a cowboy," Victoria said, aiming for skepticism but landing somewhere closer to wonder. Adam's mouth quirked. "My mother was a school teacher. She raised me to believe that how we treat people matters more than how much we accumulate." His expression grew sad. "When she died, I learned how quickly everything can be taken away. The only things that last are the choices we make and the way we make people feel. I want my choices to mean something." The crack in Victoria's walls became a chasm. She looked down at her list of questions, at the careful, practical concerns she had laid out, and realized they were all just more defenses. More ways to protect herself from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could trust this man. "I am not easy to work with," she said quietly. "I have been told I am cold, difficult, ungrateful. My own father said I had a heart like a stone." "Your father was wrong." Adam said it with such certainty that Victoria looked up in surprise. "You have the heart of a survivor." "There is a difference." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she could not name. She carefully folded her list and returned it to her reticule. "I accept your proposition, Mr. Reeves. We will try this arrangement for 1 year. At that point, we will assess whether to continue, whether I should sell to you, or whether we should go our separate ways." "Agreed." Adam stood and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Victoria stood and took it. His hand was warm and calloused from hard work, his grip firm but gentle. "When would you like me to start?" "Is tomorrow too soon?" His smile was answer enough. The next morning, Adam arrived at the property with his horse, his saddle, and a pack containing everything he owned. Victoria was already there, having spent the previous afternoon cleaning out the cabin and taking inventory of what supplies they had. It was not much, some basic tools, the lumber Adam had mentioned, a few pieces of furniture Thomas had managed to finish, but it was a start. They spent that first day in practical work. Adam assessed the cabin's construction and made a list of what was needed to make it weatherproof before winter arrived in earnest. Victoria went through Thomas's papers, organizing debts by urgency and figuring out which creditors could be put off and which needed immediate payment. They worked in surprising harmony, occasionally consulting each other but mostly focused on their individual tasks. It was not until evening, when Adam had started a fire in the cabin's functional fireplace and Victoria had made a simple meal from their meager supplies, that they sat down together and the reality of their arrangement truly hit her. She was living on an isolated homestead with a man she had met less than a week ago. She was trusting him with her future, her safety, her tentative hope that life could be something other than mere survival. It was absolutely insane. "You are thinking very loudly," Adam observed from his seat on the other side of the fire. He had a piece of wood and a knife and was carving something with idle skill. Victoria, sitting in the cabin's only chair, looked up from the papers in her lap. "I beg your pardon." "You get a line right here when you are worried." He gestured to the space between his eyebrows. "I have noticed it appears frequently. I was not aware I was so transparent." "Only to people who pay attention." He returned his focus to his carving. "What has you concerned right now?" Victoria considered deflecting, but something about the quiet evening and the warm fire made honesty feel safer than usual. "I was thinking that this is either the bravest or most foolish thing I have ever done. I have not decided which." "Can it not be both?" Adam glanced up with a slight smile. "Most brave things are also a little foolish. That is what makes them worth doing." "That is a very convenient philosophy." "It has served me well so far." He returned his attention to the wood, shaving off another thin curl. "I will tell you what I think, Mrs. Sullivan. I think you are not nearly as cold as you pretend to be. I think you protect yourself by keeping people at a distance, but it costs you, and I think you are tired of the cost." Victoria went very still. "You presume to know a great deal about me for someone we just met." "I recognize the signs because I see them in myself." Adam's voice was gentle but firm. "I spent 6 years telling myself I did not need roots or connections, that drifting was freedom, but freedom without purpose is just another kind of prison." He finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I think we are both tired of being prisoners, even if the cells we built ourselves. And you think working together will free us." Victoria heard the skepticism in her own voice, but underneath it was something else, a tentative, terrifying hope. "I think it is a start." Adam set down his carving, giving her his full attention. "I will make you a promise, Mrs. Sullivan. I will never lie to you, I will never take advantage of your trust, and I will work as hard for your success as I would for my own. All I ask in return is that you give this a genuine chance. Not just the work, but the possibility that you do not have to face everything alone anymore." Victoria wanted to argue. Every instinct she had developed since childhood told her to retreat, to rebuild her walls, to protect herself before she could be hurt again. But those instincts had kept her safe and left her desperately lonely. They had gotten her through survival but denied her anything resembling life. What if Adam was right? What if the thing she actually needed was not more protection but less? What if the bravest thing she could do was not to face the frontier alone, but to accept help from someone who offered it freely? "I will try," she said finally, the words barely above a whisper. "I cannot promise more than that." "Trying is enough." Adam's smile was warm and genuine. "Everything else we will figure out as we go." That night, after Adam had taken his bedroll to the barn and Victoria was alone in the cabin, she lay awake listening to the wind in the pines and thought about promises. She had been promised things before: security, partnership, a future. Those promises had been broken so thoroughly that she had stopped believing in them entirely, but there was something different about Adam's promise. He had not promised happiness or ease or love. He had promised honesty, effort, and partnership. Those were things she could measure, could verify with her own eyes. Maybe that was what made them believable. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Victoria with its comfort. Adam rose before dawn to work on repairs and construction projects. Victoria managed the house, dealt with creditors through carefully worded letters, and slowly began to learn about the practical aspects of running a homestead. They took meals together, usually simple affairs of bread, beans, and whatever game Adam managed to hunt. And they talked. That was the most surprising part. Victoria had never been much of a talker, having learned early that her opinions were neither valued nor welcome. But Adam asked questions that seemed genuinely interested in her answers. He wanted to know what she thought about where to plant the winter wheat, whether they should invest in chickens or save their limited capital for lumber. He asked about her childhood in Illinois and listened without judgment when she described the loneliness of being the practical daughter in a family that valued beauty and charm. In return, she learned about his life in Texas, about working cattle drives through storms and stampedes, about the camaraderie of the bunkhouse and the loneliness of always being temporary. She learned that he had a gift with horses, that he could gentle even the most stubborn animal with patience and quiet confidence. She learned that he sang while he worked, old trail songs in that deep baritone that made something in her chest ache. She learned that he kept his promises. When the first creditor came to the property, a banker from Helena demanding immediate payment on a loan Victoria had not known Thomas had taken, Adam stood beside her on the cabin's porch and let her handle the negotiation. He did not interrupt or take over, even when the banker dismissed her attempts to arrange a payment schedule. He simply stood there, solid and supportive, his presence making it clear that Victoria was not alone and not to be intimidated. When she finally got the banker to agree to monthly installments after he left, Adam simply said, "Well done," and went back to work on the barn. No condescension, no surprise that a woman had successfully negotiated with a man. Just straightforward acknowledgement of her competence. It was intoxicating. By mid-October, the cabin was weatherproof, the barn was repaired, and they had a functional chicken coop housing 6 hens Adam had traded work for in town. The first snow came early one morning, dusting the valley in white, and Victoria stood on the porch watching it fall with a feeling she barely recognized as contentment. "Beautiful, is it not?" Adam came to stand beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to her and she took it gratefully. "It is." She watched the snow catch in the pine branches. "I always hated winter in Illinois. It felt confining. And here?" Victoria considered the question. "Here it feels different, like we are preparing for something rather than just enduring it." "We are." Adam sipped his coffee. "Come spring, this place is going to transform. The winter wheat will come up, we can start a vegetable garden, maybe get some cattle if we have the capital. You will not recognize it." "You sound very certain." "I am." He looked at her, his expression serious. "I meant what I said that first day, Mrs. Sullivan. This land has good bones. With work it will thrive, I have no doubt of that." "And what about the people on it?" Victoria surprised herself with the question. "Do we have good bones too?" Adam's eyes softened. "I think you have excellent bones, Mrs. Sullivan. You have survived things that would have broken weaker people. You are still standing, still fighting, still hoping even when you pretend not to. That takes remarkable strength." "You give me too much credit." "I do not think I give you nearly enough." He paused, then added quietly, "May I ask you something personal?" Victoria's fingers tightened on her coffee cup, but she nodded. "Why do you still use Mrs. Sullivan? You could go by Miss Smith or any other name, start fresh as you said you wanted. But you keep your married name, even though the marriage brought you little joy." Victoria was silent for a long moment, watching the snow. "Because I earned it," she said finally. "I survived 3 years of a cold marriage. I crossed half a continent to an unknown future. I buried a husband and faced down his creditors. Mrs. Sullivan represents all of that, the endurance, the survival. I am not ready to give that up." "That makes sense." Adam's voice held approval. "Though for what it is worth, I think Victoria suits you better. It means victory, does it not?" She looked at him in surprise. "I did not think cowboys studied Latin." "My mother, remember. She taught me that names have power, that they shape who we become." He smiled slightly. "I think you are growing into your name, Victoria. You are claiming your victory one day at a time." Something warm and unfamiliar unfurled in Victoria's chest. No one had ever said her name like that, like it meant something, like she meant something. She wanted to retreat from the feeling, to make a dismissive comment and return to the safety of formality. But she had promised to try, and trying meant staying in the uncomfortable moments instead of running from them. "Thank you," she said quietly, "and you may call me Victoria if you wish, Mrs. Sullivan seems unnecessarily formal, given the circumstances." Adam's smile widened, genuine and delighted. "Then you should call me Adam. Mr. Reeves makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit instead of working clothes." "Adam." Victoria tested the name. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her simultaneously nervous and pleased. Very well. They stood together on the porch until their coffee was finished and the cold drove them back inside. But something had shifted between them, a small but significant step from employer and employee toward something that might eventually become friendship. Victoria told herself that was, all it could be. She had no interest in anything more, no desire to repeat the mistakes of her first marriage. She absolutely was not noticing how broad Adam's shoulders were, or how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, or the way her heart did a strange little jump whenever he said her name. That would be foolish, and Victoria Sullivan had learned long ago that foolishness was a luxury she could not afford. November arrived with more snow and dropping temperatures. The work of preparing for winter intensified. Adam spent long days cutting and splitting firewood, storing it in the barn where it would stay dry. Victoria preserved what food they could get, hung herbs to dry, and continued her careful management of their limited finances. The debts were being paid down slowly but steadily, and if they could make it through winter without any disasters, they would be in good position come spring. They had also developed evening routines that Victoria found herself looking forward to with almost embarrassing eagerness. After supper, Adam would work on small projects by the firelight, carving, mending tack, or sharpening tools, while Victoria would sew or read aloud from a book of poetry she had brought from Illinois. She had been hesitant to suggest the reading at first, certain that a cowboy would have no interest in poetry. But Adam had surprised her by requesting it, saying his mother used to read to him and he missed it. Now, on cold November evenings, Victoria's voice would fill the cabin with verses about love and loss, nature and time, while Adam's hands moved in steady rhythm and the fire crackled between them. It was peaceful in a way Victoria had never experienced. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people sharing space and time. Until the night Adam asked about her marriage. "You do not have to answer if you prefer not to," he said quickly, after the question hung in the air. "I am just trying to understand. You have said Thomas was cold, that the marriage was arranged. But was there never any affection at all?" Victoria set down her book, her hands trembling slightly. This was dangerous territory, the kind of vulnerability she had spent years avoiding. But she had promised to try, and Adam had been nothing but honest with her. He deserved the same in return. "Thomas was 47 when we married. I was 19. She stared into the fire rather than looking at Adam. "He needed a wife to maintain his standing in business. I needed to escape my father's house. It was a transaction, nothing more. We were cordial. He did not mistreat me, not in any way that society would recognize. He simply had no interest in me as a person." That must have been lonely. The quiet empathy in Adam's voice made Victoria's throat tighten. "I had been lonely my whole life." It was simply a different kind of loneliness. She paused, then added, "I told myself it did not matter. That marriage was about security and partnership, not affection. That I was being practical. But it did matter." Yes, the admission felt like pulling out a thorn that had been buried deep for years. It mattered very much. "I wanted," she stopped, shaking her head. "It does not matter what I wanted. It matters to me." Victoria finally looked at him. Adam had set down his carving and was watching her with those warm brown eyes, his expression open and patient. He was not pushing, not demanding. Simply offering space for her truth if she chose to share it. "I wanted to matter to someone," she said, her voice barely audible. "I wanted to be seen, to be valued for more than my usefulness. I wanted to be loved," she laughed, a bitter sound. "Foolish, I know. The frontier is no place for such softness." "That is not foolish at all," Adam spoke with quiet intensity, "and the frontier has nothing to do with it. Every person deserves to be seen and valued. The fact that you were denied, that does not make the wanting wrong. It makes the denial cruel." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She did not cry. She had not cried at her father's dismissal, at her wedding, at Thomas's funeral. She would not cry now over old pain and impossible wishes. "I learned to stop wanting," she said. "It was easier that way." "I do not think you stopped wanting." Adam leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze never leaving her face. "I think you stopped believing you deserve to want. There is a difference." "What difference does it make?" All the difference in the world, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Victoria, I have watched you over these weeks. You care for the chickens with gentleness, even though they are just animals meant for eggs and meat. You saved a bird that flew into the cabin window, nursing it for 2 days until it could fly again. You read poetry like it matters, like beauty matters. That is not someone who stopped wanting. That is someone who is afraid to want out loud. His words struck too close to truths Victoria had been hiding even from herself. She stood abruptly, her book falling to the floor. I should turn in, morning comes early. Victoria, Adam stood as well but made no move toward her. I am sorry if I overstepped. That was not my intention. You did not overstep, she forced herself to meet his eyes. You are right about all of it, and that terrifies me. Why? Because wanting things means they can be taken away. Caring about things means they can be lost. I have lost enough, Adam. I do not think I can survive losing more. What if you did not have to lose? His voice was gentle. What if wanting led to having, and caring led to being cared for in return? What if the risk was worth it? Victoria wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to step forward, to lower her defenses, to take the risk he was offering. But fear held her frozen, the accumulated weight of every disappointment and dismissal keeping her locked in place. I need time, she whispered. Take all the time you need. Adam's smile was sad but understanding. I am not going anywhere. Victoria retreated to her small bedroom, closed the door, and finally allowed herself to sink onto the bed. Her hands were shaking, her heart was racing. And underneath the fear, underneath the panic, was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. She had spent years believing that love was a luxury she could not afford, that vulnerability was weakness, that the frontier demanded hardness to survive. But Adam was showing her a different truth. He was just as much a product of the frontier as she was, shaped by loss and hardship, tested by isolation and danger, yet he had not let it make him cruel or closed. He believed in kindness, in partnership, in the possibility of building something better. What if he was right? What if everything she believed about survival and strength was wrong? What if the thing that actually took courage was not facing hardship alone, but allowing someone to face it with you? Victoria lay awake long into the night, listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the quiet sounds of Adam settling into his bedroll in the barn. She was standing at a crossroads, she realized. She could continue as she had been, protected by her walls and perpetually lonely. Or she could take the terrifying step of trusting that Adam meant what he said, that his care was genuine, that maybe she truly did deserve to be seen and valued. The choice was hers, and for the first time in her life, someone was giving her time to make it without pressure or expectation. That perhaps was the greatest gift of all. The next morning, Victoria woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly and emerged from her room to find Adam cooking breakfast, humming one of his trail songs. He glanced up when he heard her, his expression cautious. Good morning, I hope I did not wake you. You did not. Victoria took her usual seat at the small table. Thank you for making breakfast. Of course, he brought her coffee, then returned to the stove. They moved around each other in the practiced dance of people who had learned each other's rhythms, and slowly the tension from the previous night eased. Over breakfast, they discussed the day's tasks. Adam would ride to town for supplies. Victoria would inventory their food stores and plan meals for the coming weeks. It was practical, safe conversation, but underneath it, Victoria felt something new, not pressure but possibility. Adam had laid his cards on the table. Now he was simply waiting, giving her space to decide what she wanted. It was, she was discovering, an unfamiliar and precious thing to be given choice without consequence. Days passed, the weather grew colder, the snow deeper. Adam made his trip to town and returned with supplies and news. Helena was preparing for a harsh winter. Several outlying ranches had already been cut off by snow, and there was talk of a cattle operation looking to expand come spring. The news about cattle caught Victoria's attention. If they could get in early with a reputable operation, they could build their herd at better prices. We should send inquiries, she said, already mentally drafting letters. If we can commit to purchases now, we might negotiate better terms. Adam grinned. Look at you, thinking like a rancher. I am thinking like a businesswoman. There is a difference. Not as much as you might think. He set down the supplies and came to sit across from her. I am impressed, Victoria. When I first met you, you wanted nothing to do with this land. Now you're planning spring purchases. Victoria paused, considering. He was right. When had that shift happened? When had she stopped thinking of this place as Thomas's failed venture and started thinking of it as her future? I suppose I have surprised myself, she admitted. You surprise me regularly. Adam's tone was light, but his eyes were serious, in the best possible ways. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. The compliment was simple, but it carried weight. Adam was not a man who said things he did not mean. If he said she surprised him, he meant it as true praise. Thank you, she said quietly. They fell silent, but it was a comfortable silence now. Victoria drafted her letters while Adam organized the supplies. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the valley in white. Inside, the fire crackled and warmth spread through the small cabin. Victoria found herself thinking that this felt like home in a way nowhere ever had before, not the cabin itself, though she was growing fond of it. But the combination of purpose and partnership, of working toward something with someone who valued her contribution, of mattering. She glanced up to find Adam watching her, a soft expression on his face. When their eyes met, he smiled slightly but did not look away. Victoria held his gaze, her heart beating faster. Something was building between them, had been building since that first morning by the barn. Something that went beyond partnership or friendship, something that terrified her and drew her in equal measure. Adam, she began, then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. Yes. She took a breath. I am trying. What you said about taking risks, I want you to know that I am trying. His smile widened, genuine warmth flooding his features. I know you are, and I am in awe of your courage, Victoria, every single day. Later that night, after another evening of comfortable routine, after Victoria had read poetry and Adam had carved and the fire had burned low, they stood together by the door. Adam was heading to the barn for the night, as always. But instead of simply bidding him good night, Victoria found herself reaching out to touch his arm. He stopped, looking down at her hand on his sleeve, then up to her face. Thank you, she said, for your patience, for seeing me. For all of it. Adam covered her hand with his own, his touch warm even through the fabric. You are worth every moment of patience, Victoria, never doubt that. Then he was gone, slipping out into the cold night, leaving Victoria standing by the door with her hands still raised and her heart racing. She had touched him voluntarily, reached out instead of pulling back. It was a small gesture, but it felt momentous. She was trying, and trying was turning into feeling, feeling was turning into wanting, and wanting was becoming something she could no longer deny. She was falling in love with Adam Reeves. The realization should have sent her running. Instead, it settled over her like the snow settling over the valley, quiet, inevitable, transforming everything it touched. Victoria returned to her room but did not sleep for a long time. She lay in the darkness and allowed herself, perhaps for the first time ever, to imagine a future that included love. Not the cold transaction of her marriage to Thomas, but real love, partnership and passion, respect and tenderness, building a life together based on choice rather than necessity. It was terrifying, it was beautiful. And it was starting to feel possible. December brought the full force of Montana winter. The snow piled high around the cabin, and the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows each night. Adam had to break through ice to reach the creek for water, and the chickens huddled together for warmth in their coop. It was the kind of weather that tested endurance and revealed character. Adam met it with the same steady competence he brought to everything else. He rose early to ensure the animals were cared for, spent his days on endless winter tasks, chopping ice, shoveling paths, checking and rechecking that their supplies would last. He never complained, never suggested they should have taken easier paths. He simply did what needed doing, day after day. Victoria found herself watching him with increasing appreciation. The way he moved through the cold with purpose and efficiency. The way he always made sure she was warm and fed before tending to his own needs. The way he still found time to carve small gifts by the fire, a better spoon for her cooking, a small bird to replace the one she had saved, a frame for a painting she had mentioned wanting to hang. The gifts embarrassed her at first. She was not used to receiving things freely given, with no expectation of return, but Adam seemed genuinely pleased when she accepted them, his face lighting up at her thanks. Slowly, she learned to simply receive, to allow someone to care for her without immediately erecting defenses. It was harder than she expected. Every instinct said that accepting care meant owing debt, that allowing closeness meant inevitable pain. But Adam never asked for anything in return, never leveraged his gifts or his help. He simply gave because he wanted to, because making her happy seemed to genuinely make him happy too. It was a revelation. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and brutal cold. Victoria had not celebrated Christmas since childhood. Thomas had considered it frivolous, but Adam asked if they might mark the occasion somehow. Victoria found herself agreeing, then spending the day baking with their limited supplies. She produced a passable cake using dried fruit Adam had brought from town, and he contributed a roasted chicken from their small flock. That evening they ate their feast by firelight, the cabin warm and bright. Adam had fashioned a small wreath from pine boughs, which hung on the door, filling the space with evergreen scent. It was simple, almost primitive compared to Christmases Victoria remembered from childhood, but it was also the most meaningful Christmas she had ever experienced, because it was built by choice and shared with genuine affection. "This is nice," Adam said, raising his cup of cider in a small toast. "Thank you for agreeing to celebrate." "Thank you for suggesting it." Victoria touched her cup to his. "I had forgotten that holidays could be pleasant." "Well, now we can make new memories." He paused, then added, "if that is something you would want." The careful wording did not escape Victoria's notice. Adam was asking about the future, about whether she envisioned him in it beyond their one-year agreement. Her heart hammered as she met his eyes. "I would like that," she said quietly. "New memories sound wonderful." Adam's face transformed with his smile, and Victoria felt answering warmth spread through her chest. This was happening. She was allowing it to happen. She was choosing it. Later, after the meal was finished and they had moved to their usual evening positions by the fire, Adam cleared his throat. "I have something for you, a Christmas gift of sorts." "Adam, you did not need to." "I wanted to." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small wrapped in cloth. "It is not much, but I hope you will like it." Victoria unwrapped the cloth to reveal a wooden hair comb, beautifully carved with a pattern of pine trees and mountains. The workmanship was exquisite, each detail precise and delicate. She stared at it, overwhelmed. "Adam, this is beautiful. When did you make this?" "I have been working on it in the evenings when you were reading." He looked almost shy. "I wanted to make something that reflected where we are, what we have built together. Montana has given us both a new start. I wanted you to have something to remember that." Victoria ran her finger over the carving, blinking back tears. No one had ever made her something so personal, so thoughtful. The comb was not valuable in monetary terms, but it represented hours of work, of thought, of care. It represented being seen and valued. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will treasure it always." "There is one more thing." Adam's voice was careful now, measured. "I need to tell you something, and I want you to understand that there is no pressure attached. I simply cannot keep it to myself any longer." Victoria looked up, her heart racing. She knew what was coming. She could see it in his eyes, in the nervous set of his shoulders, and instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of rightness. "Victoria, these months with you have been the best of my life." Adam spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "You are the strongest, most courageous person I have ever met. You are also kind, even when you pretend not to be. You are clever and competent, and you make me want to be better than I am. I have fallen in love with you, and I needed you to know." The words hung in the air between them. Victoria's hands trembled on the wooden comb, her breath caught somewhere in her throat. Adam loved her. He was in love with her. The realization should have sent her running, should have triggered every defense and every fear. Instead, it felt like coming home. "I do not expect you to feel the same," Adam continued into her silence. "I know your experiences have taught you to be cautious, and I respect that completely. I simply could not spend Christmas with you and not tell you the truth. You deserve honesty always." Victoria set down the comb with careful hands. She stood, her legs somehow steady despite the trembling in her core. Adam stood as well, watching her with those honest brown eyes, waiting for whatever response she chose to give. "I have spent my entire life believing I was unworthy of love," Victoria said, her voice shaking but clear. "My father taught me that. Thomas reinforced it. I built my whole identity around the belief that I was meant to survive, not to thrive. That I was meant to be useful, not cherished. Adam's expression was pained, but he did not interrupt. And then you appeared, Victoria continued, this stranger who offered help without expecting anything in return. Who treated me like a partner, not a burden, who saw strength in me when I could only see failure, who made me feel, for the first time in my life, like I might actually matter. She took a step closer to him. You have been patient with me, Adam. You have given me time and space and the freedom to choose, and I have chosen another step. I have fallen in love with you too, and it terrifies me, but I think the terror means it is real. That it matters enough to be frightening. Adam's eyes widened. Victoria. I love you, she said, the words feeling foreign and right on her tongue. I love your kindness and your competence. I love the way you sing while you work and the way you listen when I read. I love that you see me, the real me, and you do not turn away. I love you, and I am choosing to trust that you will not hurt me with that truth. Never. Adam closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. I swear to you, Victoria, I will spend every day earning that trust. You are precious to me. You are everything. Then he kissed her, and Victoria felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than taking. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss was sweet and tender, full of promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he whispered. Not because you need security or because the frontier demands it. Marry me because you love me and I love you, and we can build something beautiful together. Victoria laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. That is a terrible proposal. You should at least take me to dinner first. We just had Christmas dinner. That does not count, but she was smiling, her heart full to bursting. Ask me again in the spring, after we have planted the wheat and bought the cattle. After we have proven that this can work. Why wait? Because I want to be sure, Victoria said honestly. Not sure of my feelings, I am sure of those, but sure that we can build this life together, that my love for you is not just gratitude or relief or desperation. I want to marry you when I know, without any doubt, that I am choosing you for all the right reasons. Adam studied her face, then slowly nodded. That is wise, and I can wait, Victoria. I would wait forever if that was what you needed. Not forever, she promised, just until spring. They spent the rest of Christmas Eve sitting close together by the fire, Victoria leaning against Adam's chest, his arms wrapped around her. They did not speak much, but the silence was full of contentment and possibility. Outside, the Montana winter raged. Inside, by the fire, they were building something that would outlast any storm. Victoria had spent her whole life believing that love was weakness, that vulnerability was foolishness, that the frontier demanded hardness to survive. But Adam had shown her a different truth. Love was not weakness, but courage. Vulnerability was not foolishness, but honesty. And the frontier did not demand hardness, it demanded partnership, the strength that came from two people facing challenges together. She had been wrong about so many things. And she had never been happier to be wrong. January and February passed in a blur of cold and snow and slowly deepening intimacy. Victoria and Adam remained physically chaste beyond kissing and gentle touches. They both agreed that some things should wait for marriage, but their emotional intimacy grew daily. They shared stories from their pasts, dreams for their future, fears and hopes, and everything in between. Victoria learned that Adam's father had been a hard man who believed in discipline over affection, and that his mother had been the source of all warmth in his childhood. She learned that he had a sister somewhere in Kansas, married to a shopkeeper whom he had not seen in 5 years. She learned that he had been in love once before, briefly, with a girl in Texas who had chosen a wealthier suitor, and that the rejection had stung but not broken him. Adam learned about Victoria's childhood in a house full of sisters, always feeling like an outsider in her own family. He learned about the long journey west as a bride, scared and alone on a wagon train. He learned about the small kindnesses she remembered from her marriage. Thomas had been cold, but not cruel, and the deep loneliness that had permeated every day. He learned that she had a beautiful singing voice that she never used because her father had told her it was too loud. "Sing for me," Adam requested one evening. Victoria shook her head. "I cannot, I have not sung in years." "Then it is past time to start again," he smiled encouragingly. "Please, Victoria. I want to hear your voice." So Victoria, hesitant and self-conscious, began to sing. Her voice was rusty at first, wavering on the notes. But Adam's expression of pure joy and wonder gave her confidence, and soon the music was flowing freely, filling the cabin with sound. She sang an old hymn her mother had taught her, then a folk song she remembered from childhood. When she finished, Adam pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "That was beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with me." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, such a small thing, singing. But it represented so much, reclaiming parts of herself she had hidden away, being vulnerable enough to share them, and being met with acceptance rather than criticism. This was what love did, she was learning. It did not diminish but expanded, creating space for your whole self to exist and be celebrated. By March, the worst of winter had passed. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Adam started preparation for spring planting, turning soil in the small plot they had designated for vegetables. Victoria organized their finances and wrote letters to the cattle operation they had been corresponding with, negotiating terms for purchasing their first small herd. The land was coming back to life, and so was Victoria. She caught herself smiling for no reason, humming while she worked, looking forward to each day instead of simply enduring it. Adam noticed the changes and said nothing, but his eyes held warmth and satisfaction. He had promised to help her thrive, and he was watching it happen. One morning in late March, Victoria woke to the sound of rain pattering on the roof. She rose and dressed, emerging from her room to find Adam already up, standing by the window watching the rain with a smile. "Good morning," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Good morning." He slipped his arm around her waist and she leaned into him naturally. They stood together, watching the rain water the winter wheat that was just beginning to show green shoots. "This is perfect timing. The wheat needed this. Everything is coming together, is it not?" Victoria felt almost superstitious saying it aloud, as though acknowledging their success might jinx it. "It is." Adam pressed a kiss to her temple. "We make a good team, Victoria Sullivan." "Victoria Reeves," she said quietly. Adam went still. "What?" Victoria turned in his arms to face him, her heart racing but her decision clear. "You asked me to marry you. I said to ask again in spring. It is spring, Adam. And my answer is yes, I choose you, I choose us, I choose this life we are building together." Adam's face transformed with joy. "Are you certain you do not need more time?" "I am certain," and she was. The fear was still there, she suspected it would always be there, a small voice reminding her that love could hurt. But beneath the fear was something stronger, trust. Trust in Adam's character, trust in the love they had built together, trust in her own strength and worth. "I love you, I want to be your wife, your partner in all things. I want to build this ranch together and grow old together and face whatever comes together, if you still want that." "If I still want," Adam laughed, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant hug. "Victoria, there is nothing I want more, nothing in the world." He set her down and kissed her soundly, both of them laughing against each other's lips. When they finally pulled apart, Adam held her face in his hands, his expression serious despite his smile. "I promise to honor you, to value you, to see you every single day of our lives. I promise to be your partner in all things, to never make you feel alone or unworthy. I promise to love you with everything I have, for all the days we are given." "I promise the same," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of it for always." They were married 3 weeks later, on a bright April morning, with wildflowers blooming across the valley. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in Helena with a few neighbors as witnesses. Victoria wore a new dress, pale blue, not black, that Adam had purchased as a wedding gift. He wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Victoria's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The preacher spoke the words, they exchanged simple gold bands, and suddenly Victoria was no longer Victoria Sullivan, downtrodden widow. She was Victoria Reeves, beloved wife, equal partner, woman who had chosen love despite every reason not to. When Adam kissed her as the preacher pronounced them married, Victoria felt the last piece of her old self fall away. She was transformed, not by marriage itself, but by the journey that had led her here. She had learned that strength was not the absence of vulnerability but the courage to be vulnerable anyway. She had learned that love was not a luxury but a necessity, the thing that turned survival into life. She had learned that she was worthy of being cherished and that allowing herself to be cherished did not make her weak but whole. The reception at the boarding house was small but joyful. Mrs. Patterson had baked a cake. Several neighbors brought gifts, jars of preserves, a set of linens, a painting of Montana mountains. Adam never left Victoria's side, his hand always at her waist or clasping hers, as though he could not quite believe his fortune. As the sun began to set, they made their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch, their ranch, through the spring evening. The valley was green and alive, the creek running high with snowmelt, the cabin and barn standing strong against the darkening sky. Adam helped Victoria down from the wagon and they stood together, looking at what they had built. "Home," Victoria said softly. "Home," Adam agreed. Then he swept her into his arms, making her laugh in surprise, and carried her across the threshold of their cabin. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, truly together for the first time, Victoria felt a peace she had never known was possible. Adam held her close, his touch tender and reverent, and showed her what love looked like when it was real and mutual and freely chosen. Later, curled against his chest with his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here. From lonely daughter to reluctant bride to downtrodden widow to finally, beloved wife and equal partner. It had not been easy. It had required her to dismantle every belief she had built about herself and the world, to face her deepest fears, to choose courage over safety again and again, but it had been worth it. Every hard moment, every scary choice, every vulnerable admission, all of it had led to this. To being held by a man who loved her not despite her scars but including them, who saw her clearly and chose her anyway, who believed her capable of anything. "What are you thinking?" Adam's voice rumbled in his chest beneath her ear. Victoria smiled in the darkness. "I am thinking that I was wrong." "About what?" "About love being a luxury, about the frontier demanding hardness. About being unworthy." She propped herself up on her elbow to look at him, even though they could barely see each other in the dim light. "I thought I had to face everything alone to survive, but the truth is I was just barely surviving. Now I am living, and it is because of you, because of us." Adam reached up to cup her cheek. "You would have figured it out eventually. You are too strong not to." "Perhaps, but it would have taken longer and hurt more." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for being patient with me, for helping me see what was possible. Thank you for taking the risk, for choosing to trust me." He pulled her back down against his chest. "I love you, Victoria Reeves. Every stubborn, courageous, beautiful part of you." "I love you too," she whispered, "more than I knew it was possible to love." They fell asleep tangled together, safe and warm and home. Spring turned to summer and the ranch thrived. The winter wheat came in strong, providing both income and seed for the next planting. The vegetable garden produced abundantly, more than they could eat, allowing Victoria to preserve stores for the coming winter and sell surplus in town. In June, they took delivery of their cattle, 20 head to start, a small herd but a beginning. Adam's skill with animals showed as he worked with them, calm and confident, and Victoria found herself learning from him, overcoming her initial nervousness around the large animals. They hired a young man from town to help with the heavy labor of running cattle, a boy named Joseph who was eager to learn and willing to work hard. Victoria managed the books, negotiated sales, and handled the business side while Adam worked the land and livestock. It was a true partnership, each playing to their strengths, supporting each other's weaknesses. In August, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She stood in the kitchen one morning, her hand on her still flat stomach, overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. She had not thought about children, had not allowed herself to imagine that future. But now it was here, real and immediate, and she did not know whether to laugh or cry. When she told Adam that evening, he quite literally swept her off her feet, spinning her around the cabin while she laughed and protested that he would make her dizzy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you pleased?" Victoria asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Pleased, Victoria, I am over the moon." He set her down carefully, his hands going to her stomach with gentle reverence. "You are going to be an amazing mother." I do not know about that, old insecurities surfaced. What if I am like my mother, cold and critical? You are nothing like that, Adam said it with complete certainty. You have the biggest heart of anyone I know. Our child is going to be loved beyond measure. Victoria leaned into him, allowing his confidence to shore up her doubts. Our child, she said, testing the words. That sounds wonderful. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Victoria slowed down as her belly grew, though she refused to stop working entirely. Adam hovered protectively, insisting she rest more, taking on extra tasks to spare her the heavy labor. She found his attentiveness endearing rather than smothering, a sign of love rather than control. On a snowy night in early February, exactly 1 year after Adam had first told her he loved her, Victoria went into labor. Adam rode for the doctor in Helena through the storm, while Mrs. Patterson from town, who had come to stay in anticipation of the birth, helped Victoria through the early stages. Adam returned with the doctor just as the labor intensified, and he stayed by Victoria's side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. You are the strongest person I know, he told her during a particularly difficult contraction. You can do this, you can do anything. And Victoria, who had spent most of her life believing she was weak and unworthy, drew on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. She labored through the night, and as dawn broke over the Montana mountains, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that made both parents laugh through their tears. The doctor placed the baby in Victoria's arms, and she stared down at the tiny, perfect face in wonder. Dark hair like Adam's, blue eyes like hers, and an expression of alert curiosity that suggested their child had inherited the best of both of them. She is perfect, Adam breathed, sitting beside them on the bed, his arm around Victoria's shoulders. Absolutely perfect. What should we name her? Victoria asked, unable to look away from her daughter's face. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, in the golden light of dawn, with their miracle sleeping peacefully, the name came to Victoria with sudden clarity. Hope, she said, her name should be Hope. Adam looked at her, understanding flooding his features. Because she represents everything we built together, everything we hoped for. Yes. Victoria looked up at him, this man who had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that life could be more than survival. This little girl is the embodiment of that gift. Hope Reeves, Adam said, testing the name. He gently stroked their daughter's soft hair. Welcome to the world, little one. Your mother and I have been waiting for you. The doctor and Mrs. Patterson left them alone after ensuring both mother and baby were healthy. Adam climbed into bed beside Victoria, and they lay together, their daughter between them, watching her sleep. Outside, the sun rose fully over the valley, painting everything in shades of pink and gold. I cannot believe this is my life, Victoria said softly. 1.5 years ago, I was standing beside Thomas's grave, convinced I would never matter to anyone, never build anything worth having. And now you have a thriving ranch, a devoted husband, and a beautiful daughter, Adam finished. You built all of that, Victoria. Your courage, your determination, your willingness to take risks despite your fear, all of it led here. We built it together, she corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. We built it together, he agreed. He leaned over carefully to kiss her forehead. Thank you, Victoria, for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me this family and this life. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of it. You already are, Victoria said. You have been from the beginning. They lay together as the morning light grew stronger, a small family in a Montana cabin, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing. Outside, the snow fell gently, adding to the blanket that covered their land. The cattle were safe in the barn, the winter wheat was sleeping beneath the snow, and the ranch that had been a failed venture was now a thriving homestead. But more than that, Victoria had found something she had not known to look for, a home not just in a place but in a person and in herself. She had learned that the frontier was not just harsh landscape to be survived but opportunity to be seized. She had learned that love was not weakness but the greatest strength, that vulnerability was not foolishness but bravery, that asking for help was not failure but wisdom. She had learned that she was worthy of love, of partnership, of happiness. that her worth was not determined by her usefulness or her compliance but by her inherent humanity. That she deserved to be seen, valued, and cherished exactly as she was. Most importantly, she had learned that endings could become beginnings, that loss could lead to gain, and that even the most downtrodden widow could find not just survival but joy, not just existence but life abundant. As Hope stirred and began to fuss, ready for her first feeding, Victoria looked at Adam and saw her future written in his loving gaze. A future of partnership and passion, of building and growing, of facing challenges together and celebrating victories as one. A future where she would never again have to face anything alone because she had chosen love and been chosen in return. The old Victoria Sullivan, the one who believed herself unworthy and unlovable, was gone. In her place was Victoria Reeves, wife, mother, rancher, beloved, strong not because she faced hardship alone but because she had the courage to accept partnership. Worthy not because she proved it through endless striving but because she existed, and that was enough. Outside, the Montana winter continued its reign, but inside the cabin, spring had already arrived, bringing with it warmth and light and the promise of endless tomorrows. Victoria held her daughter close, felt Adam's arms around them both, and knew with absolute certainty that she was home. The frontier had not broken her, love had not destroyed her. Together they had transformed her into someone she had never imagined she could be, someone whole, someone cherished, someone finally free. And as Hope nursed hungrily at her breast, as Adam's breath grew slow and even with exhaustion and contentment, as the sun climbed higher over the valley they had claimed as their own, Victoria Sullivan Reeves closed her eyes and smiled. This was her happy ending, and more importantly, it was her happy beginning. The years that followed proved that their foundation was solid. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Adam expanded their cattle operation, developing a reputation for quality livestock that brought buyers from across Montana territory. Victoria's business acumen kept them profitable even in hard years, her careful management and shrewd negotiations earning respect from men who had initially dismissed her as just a cowboy's wife. Hope grew into a spirited child, fearless and curious, clearly her father's daughter in temperament and her mother's in determination. She learned to ride almost before she could walk, following Adam around the ranch on a gentle mare, absorbing his lessons about animals and land with focused attention. She also spent hours with Victoria, learning to read and figure, to manage a household and handle business correspondence. 2 years after Hope's birth, Victoria delivered twin boys, William and James, who brought chaos and laughter in equal measure. Then 3 years after that, another daughter arrived, Grace, completing their family. The cabin was expanded twice, growing from that initial small structure into a proper ranch house with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor for entertaining the increasing number of friends and business associates who visited. But through all the growth and change, through the challenges of drought years and hard winters, through the daily work of raising children and building a ranch, Victoria and Adam never lost sight of what made it all possible. The love they had chosen, the partnership they had forged, the trust they had built one vulnerable moment at a time. On their 5th anniversary, as they stood on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Adam pulled Victoria close and said, "Do you remember that first morning? When you pointed a rifle at me and demanded I leave?" Victoria laughed. "I thought you were a trespasser. I had no idea you were my future." "Neither did I, but I hoped." He kissed her temple. "You were so fierce, so determined not to need anyone, and all I wanted was to show you that needing someone could be a gift, not a burden." "You succeeded." Victoria turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me everything I did not know I needed. A home, a family, a purpose, but most of all you gave me yourself, your honesty, your patience, your unwavering belief that I was worth the effort." "You were always worth it, Victoria. I just helped you see what was already there." They kissed as the sun set over their valley, their children's laughter floating on the evening air, the land they had built together spread out before them. It was not the life Victoria had imagined for herself all those years ago in Illinois. It was so much better. She had been a downtrodden widow, convinced her life was over at 22, believing herself unworthy of love or happiness. But she had met a strong cowboy who saw past her defenses to the woman beneath, who offered her partnership instead of pity, who taught her that love was not weakness but the greatest courage. Together they had rewritten the rules of romance, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through daily choice. Through showing up, being honest, staying patient, and believing in each other even when belief was hard. Through building something real and lasting, one day at a time, one trust at a time, one act of love at a time. Their story was not a fairy tale, it was better than that. It was real, messy, challenging, and absolutely worth every moment. It was a testament to the truth that even in the harsh frontier, even after heartbreak and loss, even when you have given up on hope, love can find you. And if you are brave enough to reach back, to lower your walls, to trust despite your fear, love can transform everything. Victoria Sullivan had learned to believe in love again. And in doing so, she had found not just a husband but a partner, not just a home but a haven, not just a life but a legacy worth building. As the stars began to appear over Montana, as Adam held her close and their children played safely nearby, Victoria sent a silent thank you to the universe that had led a desperate widow and a wandering cowboy to that same piece of land on that cold morning so long ago. Their love had rewritten more than romance. It had rewritten Victoria herself, transforming her from a woman who believed herself broken into one who knew her own strength. From someone who faced the world alone to someone who chose partnership. From someone who had given up on happiness to someone who lived it every single day. And that transformation, that journey from isolation to belonging, from fear to courage, from mere survival to abundant life, that was the greatest love story of all. The end.